I should have left when the dog stopped barking. There was a mixed breed tied up outside the neighbor's barn. I had walked past him twice carrying tables, and he had barked both times. Annoying. Constant. The kind of bark you start hearing as background noise. When it stopped, it took me about 30 seconds to notice it had stopped. I looked out at the back field. Nothing. Trees at the edge of the light. Dark field. The air smelled like wet earth, and there was something else underneath it. Metallic, organic, heavy. I figured it was a dead animal in the brush, filed it away and went back inside. That was at 4 o'clock. The party started at 6. Ashley showed up in a white dress with gold trim, pearl earrings that had been her grandmother's, already laughing before she even walked in. The band was playing. The barn was warm and packed. Donna had made 3 kinds of potato salad, and Roy was working the grill outside. 80 people with no reason to be afraid. Around 8, Ashley found me by the dessert table. Hair coming loose on one side, flushed from all the dancing. "Hold this for me?" She pressed her phone into my hand. "Going to the bathroom, don't read my texts." "Wasn't even thinking about it," I said. She smiled and disappeared down the hall. 8 minutes. I count time without meaning to. 8 years working as a paramedic will do that to you. 8 minutes, and then Brittany, Ashley's best friend, appeared next to me wearing an expression that had no business being at a party. "Did you see Ash come back?" She hadn't come back. Bathroom empty, storage room empty, Trevor hadn't seen her. I walked the entire barn twice. I went to the back fire door. It was open 2 inches. I pushed it slowly. The cold hit me first. Then the smell. Stronger now, so much stronger than at 4 o'clock. And I understood in that moment that it wasn't a dead animal in the brush. It was something else. It was the kind of smell I knew from bad calls. From scenes I don't describe to my family when I get home. My phone's flashlight swept across the field. The neighbor's dog was lying on the ground with its collar still hooked to the post, not moving, not making a sound. On its side, motionless at a distance my light barely reached. I called Ashley's name. Once. The sound died fast. At the edge of what my flashlight could reach, the branches along the tree line were broken from the inside out. Something wide had pushed through there. No grass, no tree does that on its own. From inside that darkness came a sound. Low, wet, steady. It sounded a lot like breathing. I could have sworn it was. I went back inside and looked for Roy. My hands were completely steady, which meant I was more scared than I knew how to process yet. "Roy," I said. "Call 911. Ashley's not in the barn." Roy looked at me the way he always looked at me when I said something he didn't want to hear. There was a specific expression he had. Not angry, more like resistance, like someone deciding whether it's worth the energy to doubt you. He'd been giving me that look since I was 10 years old and told him his truck's brakes felt soft. He waited another month before getting them fixed. Almost ended up in a ditch on Route 33. "She probably stepped outside for some air," he said. "You know how hot it gets in there." "Roy." The fire door was open. "There's something in the field." "Carol, call 911. He held that look, deciding whether I was overreacting. Then something in my face settled the question, because he turned and walked to the corner of the barn and pulled out his phone. Slow. He still thought I was overreacting. I wasn't. I went to Brittany and told her to stay calm and not go outside. She started crying anyway. I asked Trevor to check the parking lot. He went without arguing, which surprised me. Trevor was usually the one who argued about everything. Roy came back. Called. "They're sending someone." He lowered his voice. "They said it's too early to file a missing persons report. Said she's probably just outside." "There's something in that field," I said. "I want everyone away from the back door." "Carol, you're going to scare people." "Good." He looked at me for a moment. Then, "What did you hear out there?" "Breathing. At the tree line. Heavy. Ongoing. Loud." He didn't say anything. He walked over to the space between the bar and the back door and put his hands in his pockets and looked at the floor. Roy wasn't stupid. He'd hunted his whole life. He knew what animals sounded like. I pulled together Trevor and 2 of Roy's friends, Dale Hoover and Mike Shreve, both deer hunters, both sober enough. And we went out through the back door with flashlights. The security light was still dead. We spread out across the field, the beams crossing and splitting apart. The fence at the back of the property was an old barbed wire line, bent down in a few spots. We found the place where the trail ended. The middle wire was bent down toward the ground, not broken, pressed evenly along nearly a yard of wire. Like something very large had leaned over it without any hurry. Dale shined his light close to the wire. Something's caught on the barb. We looked. Dark fibers on the metal, thicker than fabric. Not synthetic. Mike said it was animal fur and didn't add anything else. I pointed my light into the field beyond the fence. The trail continued, heavier on the other side. The taller grass more displaced and flattened. Went into the trees and didn't come back. We went inside. The party had gone quiet. The news was spreading through the barn, the way it spreads at family gatherings, in whispers and sideways glances. The band had stopped. The 4 musicians stood on the stage holding their instruments, just watching. Donna arrived at 9:15. She hadn't come to the party. Migraine, she'd been resting at home. But Roy had called her when he called 911, and she showed up in her pajamas with a jacket thrown over them. She walked in and immediately scanned the barn the way only a mother does. That full sweep that reads every face in under a second and tells her what she needs to know. "Where is she?" Roy tried to explain. I watched Donna's face move through the sequence I'd seen on calls. Disbelief, rationalization, recalibration, and then the fear seeping in underneath like rising water. She'd always known something about Ashley that Roy didn't. She knew Ashley wouldn't have walked out. Not at her own birthday party, not without telling anyone. "The back fence," I said. There was something in the field. It had been getting closer after dark. Donna looked at me. We had always understood each other better than either of us understood Roy. "What kind of something?" "I don't know," I said. She turned to Roy. "Call back. Tell them to get here fast." Deputy Jake Harmon from the Upshur County Sheriff's Department arrived 40 minutes later. Mid-40s, broad through the chest, gray at the temples, with the kind of face that doesn't shift expression easily. I respected that. He asked the standard questions. Last time seen, what she was wearing, boyfriend, history of wandering off. Donna answered everything in a flat, controlled voice I recognized as someone holding themselves together through sheer force of structure. Harmon asked to see the back field. We went out together. I showed him the trail, the fence, the fibers on the wire. He crouched down and examined the wire for a long time without saying anything. When he stood up, he swept his flashlight slowly toward the tree line. "What's beyond the trees?" "Stone Coal Creek drainage," I said. "Then the ridge, federal reforestation land for about 6 miles in." He nodded. He kept the light on the trees. "You said you heard something." Breathing, low, animal I didn't recognize. He switched off his flashlight and stood still in the dark for 10 seconds. He didn't say what he was looking at. There was nothing to look at. He just stood there, in the dark field, listening. Then, "Get your family inside. I'm going to call for backup on the radio." He didn't say why. He didn't need to. We went back. I stayed near the window that faced the field. Harmon stayed outside a few more minutes, alone, flashlight off, just watching the tree line. That's when Trevor called me from across the barn. He'd found something in the parking lot. Ashley's car was there. A gray Honda Civic she'd gotten for her 17th birthday. Wait, her 16th. She had just turned 16. My brain snagged on that for a second. The keys were inside, visible on the driver's seat. Her purse was on the passenger seat. Her phone I still had in my hand because she'd given it to me before going to the bathroom, and I still hadn't found anywhere to put it down. I stood there looking at that phone for a moment. There was a message notification on the screen. From Brittany, sent at 8:22, 6 minutes after Ashley had walked away. "Where did you go?" I put the phone in my pocket and didn't say anything to anyone about the message. Backup arrived in 2 cruisers. One deputy named Price, too new to the job, and Corporal Warren Deal from the state police, who showed up in his own truck because he was off duty. Deal was older than Harmon, quieter, with the kind of attentiveness that doesn't announce itself. He went straight to the field without anyone having to ask. He was out there for about 15 minutes. When he came back, he pulled Harmon aside. I got close enough to hear. "There are tracks beyond the fence," Deal said, voice low. "Deep, wide, 5 contact points too far apart." A pause. It's nothing I can put a name to. Harmon didn't respond right away. There's blood too, Deal went on. Not much, but it's there. Across the barn, Donna was sitting in a chair with her sister Linda beside her. She wasn't crying. She was staring at the back door with the look of someone who already knows and is just waiting for someone to say it out loud. I looked at her phone. Then I looked at the field outside, dark beyond the window. The neighbor's dog was still lying in the same spot, motionless, collar still hooked to the post. In 8 years on the job, I'd learned the difference between an animal that's sleeping and an animal that isn't going to wake up. I'd known since 4 o'clock. State police brought 2 K9 units at 12:15, 2 German shepherds, a large male named Cody and a female named Sable. The handlers came in with the calm efficiency of professionals who don't let anything show on their faces, and I respected that. It was the kind of control I tried to have at work. Didn't always manage it. They let both dogs sniff Ashley's denim jacket, which was folded over the back of the main chair. The chair decorated with gold ribbon and a star-shaped balloon that Donna had blown up with a helium tank the afternoon before. Both animals pulled at their leashes immediately, toward the back door. Strong signal, one of the handlers said. Fresh trail. They headed out into the field with high-powered flashlights. The whole field went white. I watched from the window. The dogs crossed the grass fast, straining at the leashes, heading straight for the fence. They were moving well. Moving with the confidence of animals that know what they're doing and have done it hundreds of times. They stopped at the fence. Not at the spot where the wire was bent down. They stopped at the impression in the mud. That deep mark near the post that Deal had photographed earlier. Cody got there first, Sable a step behind, and both animals stopped at the exact same instant, so abruptly that the handlers stumbled forward. Then the ears went back. Sable lowered her head. Cody turned sideways to the mark and wouldn't face it. The handlers worked for 10 minutes. Encouragement, pressure, trying to approach from different angles. Neither dog moved past that point. Sable lay down in the grass and put her head between her paws, and when the handler tried to get her up, she made a sound. Not a bark, not a growl, just a low, continuous note that I could hear through the closed barn door. I had seen dogs react like that before. At accident scenes, in houses, after fires, in places where something very wrong had happened. Their sense of smell processes what our eyes can't see. But I had never seen 2 trained animals refuse at the same point, simultaneously, like they had walked into a wall. They brought the dogs back in after 15 minutes. One of the handlers, a stocky man named Calloway, came inside and spoke quietly with Deal. I was close enough. Both signaled the trail going beyond the fence, then they completely locked up. A pause. That's unusual. I've worked with Cody for 6 years. He doesn't lock up. What does that mean? Deal asked. Calloway looked at the door. It means the scent profile of whatever made those marks is outside his experience. Something he was never trained to track. Never encountered. Another pause. Shorter. Never wanted to encounter. 2 more cruisers arrived before 2 in the morning. 6 deputies spread out along the Stone Coal Creek drainage with flashlights and radios. They didn't find Ashley, but they found 2 more of those marks in the mud along the creek bank, moving northeast, climbing toward the ridge. And they found a doe in the mountain laurel thicket 40 yards from the fence. The doe hadn't been eaten. She had been opened. I knew when Harmon came back inside by the expression he was wearing. It's not the expression of someone who found a dead animal. It's the expression of someone who found something that doesn't have a name yet. He pulled me into the side office off the barn where Roy kept invoices and a small refrigerator. He closed the door and sat in a folding chair across a narrow table. He opened his notepad, clicked his pen. Tell me again. The sound at the tree line. Low, rhythmic, like breathing but with weight behind it. The way a large animal sounds when it's very still. But it wasn't a bear. I've been on calls with bears. I know what a bear sounds like. It wasn't that. He wrote something down. What was it? I don't know. He nodded like that was the answer he expected. Outside, Deal and Price were running a grid sweep across the field. I watched through the window. Deal stopped 3 times and crouched down. The 3rd time he stayed crouched for a long while and called Price over. When he stood up and turned toward the barn, I could see his expression had changed, even at that distance. They came back inside. "We found blood," Deal told Harmon. "Beyond the fence on the other side, not a lot, but it's there." Donna made a sound. Not a scream, just a syllable. Something between a breath and a word that broke apart before it could form. Roy put his arm around her. "How much?" I said. My voice was steady, training. "About 2 square yards spread out, and there are more tracks. Deep, all moving toward the creek." "What kind of tracks?" I said. Deal took his phone out of his pocket and showed me the photograph. The mark in the mud was clear. 5 separate points, spread wider than made sense. The center one the longest, each ending in a sharp depression that sank deeper than the rest. Whatever had made it was carrying considerable weight. "Is it human?" Harmon asked. Deal shook his head slowly. "I don't know what it is." The next 40 minutes were procedure. Harmon called the county forensics unit. One tech, a man named Grayson, who arrived at 1:15 with work lights and a camera bag, and the focused expression of someone who had learned to set aside the emotional weight of a scene and just work. I respected that too. I went out with Grayson. He photographed the marks, the trail, the fibers on the wire. He photographed the blood. While he worked, I walked along the fence toward the east corner, where the ground sloped down toward the creek. That's when I found it. A sneaker, white, canvas, Ashley's size. She wore a 6. I'd bought her shoes 2 Christmases ago. This one was on its side in the grass just beyond the fence, the lace still tied. Grayson photographed it, bagged it, looked at me after sealing the bag and said nothing. He didn't need to. That sneaker meant she hadn't walked out of there on her own. I went back inside and told Harmon. He and Deal moved away from Donna to talk, which meant they didn't want her to hear. I stayed where I was and watched the back door. A man I didn't know, 60 or so, white hair, a neighbor of Roy's named Burl Casto who had shown up when he saw the lights, raised his hand when Harmon asked if anyone had noticed anything unusual in the area lately. "Found my dog," Burl said. His voice was rough. 2 weeks ago, back of my property near the creek. He stopped. Opened, top to bottom, but no animal had fed on him, just opened, like somebody did it on purpose. A heavy silence fell over the barn. Harmon wrote it down without expression. Anyone else? Nobody spoke. But I watched 3 or 4 people look at the floor or at the wall, the way people do when they know something and have made a private decision not to say it. I looked at Donna. She was still staring at the back door with that expression. The one belonging to someone who already knows and is just waiting for someone to say it out loud. Nobody said it that night, but all of us knew. I left at 3 in the morning. I didn't want to go. But Harmon said there was nothing more civilians could do that night, that the search would continue at dawn with more resources, that everyone needed to rest. He said it in the tone of someone who already knows nobody's going to rest. Trevor offered me a ride. I said no. I had my own car, and I needed the silence of driving alone. That controlled kind of silence where you're responsible for the speed and the direction and what plays on the radio. And those small things keep you functional when the big ones are completely out of your hands. I took Route 20 back to Buckhannon. The road was empty. It was one of those September nights where fog comes down from the ridge and hangs in the gaps between the trees, and your headlights cut through the mist in a way that makes everything look like it ends 10 yards ahead. I drove slow, not because I was in any hurry to get anywhere. On Kanawha Street, I parked in the basement spot and climbed the stairs to the 3rd floor without turning on the hall light. I know that building by heart. 6 years living there. I went in, locked up, went to the kitchen, filled a glass of water, drank it standing up. Then I went to the bedroom window that faced the side alley and looked down. Empty alley. A single street light at the far end throwing orange light onto the asphalt. I went to sleep in the clothes I was wearing. I woke up at 7:30 to my phone ringing. It was Harmon. "There's a wildlife biologist coming in from Morgantown," he said. No good morning. "Dr. Sherry Bass, from Wesleyan. We called her last night after Calloway reported the dog's behavior. She drove before dawn." A pause. "I asked for you to be here." "Why me?" "Because you're the one who heard it." I got to the barn at 8:40. More cruisers than before. A DNR truck, a state forensics van. Outside, in a separate group, Roy and Trevor and two cousins I barely knew, all carrying the same silence of people who spent the night without sleeping and are waiting for bad news. Donna wasn't there. Roy said she'd stayed with her sister Linda in Elkins, that she couldn't be in Buckhannon. I understood that. Dr. Bass was in the back field with Deal when I arrived. She was around 50, short hair, hiking boots, holding Grayson's photographs up with both hands against the morning light like someone reading an X-ray. I walked over to them. She didn't look up when I approached, kept studying the photos. This stride pattern, she said, to no one in particular. Look at the heel impact, deep, uneven. This is weight being displaced bipedally, not quadrupedally. She lowered the photos finally and looked out at the field. But the digital spread, the contact points, that's not any primate I know. Not at this latitude, not at this size. What size? I asked. She looked at me for a second, sizing me up. Based on mud displacement, accounting for soil density after the rain 2 nights ago, I'd estimate between 310 and 375 pounds. A pause. At minimum. Deal said nothing. Neither did I. She went to the fence and crouched near the mark that had stopped the dogs. She stayed down there for a while, tilting her head from one side to the other. Then she pulled a folding ruler from her vest pocket and measured. Wrote something in a small notepad. "I want to cast this," she told Deal. "I've got the materials in my truck." While she went to get them, Harmon appeared from across the field and walked toward me with the gait of someone carrying something they don't yet know how to deliver. "We found more," he said. "More what?" "Along the creek. The overnight team swept about half a mile out. They found more tracks, 3 more deer carcasses open the same way, and..." He hesitated, which was unusual for him. "A site that looks like it's been used regularly. The vegetation is pressed down in a circle. Scat. Old bones. At least several weeks of activity." I processed that. "It's not a passing animal," I said. "No. There's a territory here. That creek is the center of it." He looked at the brush beyond the fence. "That federal reforestation land goes a long way in. Nobody goes in there regularly. No marked trails for the last 5 miles. 8 years working in the ER taught me that the most dangerous moment at a scene isn't the chaos. It's when the chaos organizes, when the facts start fitting together and the picture they form is worse than anything you'd imagined. I was looking at that picture now. Dr. Bass came back with a small bucket and casting material. She worked quietly, mixing the compound and pouring it slowly into the impression in the mud. While she waited for it to set, she walked slowly along the fence, looking at the ground on both sides. She stopped, crouched down again. "Harmon," she called. We went to her. She was pointing at the ground beyond the fence where the tall grass on the other side grew in thicker. There was a second impression there, partial, only the front half of the foot, but it was enough. "Look at the direction," she said. The mark was pointed back toward the barn, not toward the creek, not up toward the ridge. Pointed at the barn, as though whatever had made it had stopped there and stood watching. Nobody spoke for a moment. "How long do you think it stood here?" Harmon asked. Dr. Bass ran her finger along the edge of the impression without touching it. "The lateral displacement of the mud suggests sustained weight. This isn't a stride in motion. It's static." She stood up. "It stood here for some time, watching the barn while the party was going on. I thought about 4 o'clock, about the dog that had stopped barking. The party started at 6. At 4:15, when I was carrying tables, it was already at the edge of the field. 80 people walked into that barn after that, ate and danced and took pictures, not knowing there was something outside watching them, waiting, choosing. I went to the parking lot to get water from my car. I needed a minute away from the field. I sat in the driver's seat with the door open and drank half a liter straight through and stared at nothing for about 30 seconds. My phone buzzed. Text from Trevor. "Harmon said they're expanding the search up the ridge. DNR's bringing a team in tomorrow morning." I replied just, "Okay." Then I saw the second message, sent 3 minutes before Trevor's. A number I didn't have saved. Short text. "Are you the cousin who was at the barn?" I looked at the number for a moment. I am, I wrote. Who is this? The reply took 2 minutes. Burl Casto. We met last night. I talked about the dog. Pause. There's something I didn't say in front of everybody. Can you call me? I called immediately. He picked up on the second ring. His voice was lower than the night before, like he was talking from inside somewhere closed off. I didn't tell everything last night, he said. About the dog. Tell me now. When I found him, Burl said slowly, there were marks all around. On the ground in the yard, big ones. Going to the back of the property, toward the creek. A long pause. And coming back. I waited. It was twice, he said. The tracks going and the tracks coming back are from different days. The mud had dried different. Another pause. Whatever it is, it went to the creek and came back. Same spot. Like it was checking on something. When was this? First set of tracks about 3 weeks ago. Second about 10 days after that. His voice dropped even lower. 4 days before the girls' party. I sat in the car for a moment after I hung up. The backfield of the barn was 400 yards from Burl Casto's property. 400 yards along the creek. Whatever this was hadn't shown up there by chance on the night of the party. It had been there before. It had come back. It had learned the place, the hours, the routine. And then the party had happened. 80 people, loud music, lights, and a girl who walked out the wrong door at the wrong time. I should have left when the dog stopped barking. That thought kept coming back. Not in any useful way. Not as analysis, not as a lesson for next time. It just kept coming back. The way things do when there's nothing you can do with them. I drove back to Kanawha Street at 2 in the afternoon. The sun was strong, the sky cloudless, and Buchanan looked exactly like what it was. A small town on a September afternoon, with people buying groceries and filling up their gas tanks and going about their lives knowing nothing. I envied that. I can't remember the last time I envied anything, but I envied that. I went up to the apartment. Didn't eat. Sat at the kitchen table with my notepad. The same one I use after difficult calls because my supervisor recommended it years ago. Write while it's fresh. Name what you saw. Name what you don't understand. I wrote, unidentified tracks, bipedal pattern. Estimated 310, 375 LEBs. Carcasses opened, not consumed. K9 units refused the trail. Sound at the tree line. Breathing, wait, stillness. I stopped. Then I wrote, the sneaker was still tied. I closed the notepad. There was one thing I hadn't written, that I didn't know how to write. Dr. Bass had told me before I left the barn while we were waiting for the cast of the track to dry. She said it quietly, like someone thinking out loud who isn't yet sure they believe their own reasoning. That activity site we found at the creek, she said. The vegetation pressed down in a circle, the old bones. She looked at the brush. That's return behavior. This animal has a territory and comes back to it. But there's something more. She hesitated. The distribution of the carcasses, the location, the distance from the central point, suggests it moves around the perimeter systematically. It doesn't hunt at random. It knows the area and maps it. I looked at her. The barn is 400 yards from the creek, she went on. The Casto property, 300. The earliest evidence of presence in the area dates back about a month. She closed her notepad. It was mapping. Learning what was here. The rhythms, the movements. She didn't say anything more after that. She didn't need to. I kept thinking about it at the kitchen table. A month. Burl Casto had given the timeline. First tracks 3 weeks ago. Second set 10 days after that. 4 days before the party. And before that, further back, when the grass in the back field had started getting pressed down without anyone noticing, without anyone thinking to check. How long had it been there before the first visible sign? I worked through the next night on shift. Normal calls, a bicycle fall on 8th Street, an elderly man with high blood pressure on the east side of town, a minor accident at the Route 33 exit. I did all of it on autopilot. My coworkers noticed I was quiet and didn't ask, which is the unspoken agreement on any crisis team. When someone needs silence, you give them the silence. At 3 in the morning, on break, I went to the station kitchen and made coffee and stood there staring at the wall. I thought about Ashley at 8 o'clock handing me her phone. Don't read my texts. The smile. The way she disappeared down the hall. I thought about Burl Casto saying the animal had returned to the same spot twice, days apart, as if it were checking on something. And I thought about something I hadn't been able to name until that moment. But that had been there since the night of the party, since Dr. Bass had described the mapping behavior. The barn had hosted events before. Roy rented the space regularly. Weddings, birthday parties, company cookouts. I had been there at least 3 times in the last 2 years. It was a place of constant activity, people coming and going, music and cars and lights. Nothing had happened before. And then it happened with Ashley. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't want to know what that meant, but the thought settled there, quiet, in the corner of my mind where things go when you don't want to look at them too closely. That maybe it wasn't the place, that maybe it was her. I finished my shift at 6 in the morning, went straight to the barn where the search was starting again in daylight. More volunteers now, 31 civilians beyond the deputies. They covered half a mile of creek drainage in 2 hours and found nothing. No Ashley. No tracks beyond the ones we already knew. Dr. Bass had gone back to Morgantown with the casts and fur samples. Harmon gathered everyone at 10 in the morning. We're expanding the search into the federal reforestation land above the ridge, he said. We've requested support from the Forest Service and the DNR. They're bringing a team in tomorrow. He looked around at the group. Keep your phones on. People drifted away gradually. I stayed looking at the back field with Trevor. You think she's up there, he said. It wasn't a question. I think that's where the tracks go, I said. He was quiet for a moment. My grandfather had a name for it, for the thing in the mountains. He looked at the ridge. He hunted that hill his whole life, and then he just stopped, out of nowhere, when I was around 12. Never said why. I didn't say anything. You think she suffered? He asked. It was the question family always asked. In 8 years, I'd learned that the honest answer rarely helps, and the gentle answer is rarely believed. So I said what I said when there was no right answer. I don't know, I said. I hope not. He nodded. We stood there a while longer looking at the ridge, and the ridge gave nothing back. I left at 11. In the parking lot, before getting in my car, I stood still for a second with my keys in my hand. Ashley's phone was still in my pocket. I should have turned it in to the police the first night. I hadn't. I couldn't explain why. It wasn't procedure. It wasn't paramedic instinct. It was something else. Like letting go of the phone meant letting go of the last concrete proof that she had been there, that she had pressed it into my hand with that smile and said, "Don't read my texts," and disappeared down the hall. I put it back in my pocket and got in the car. That night, for the first time since the party, I woke up at 2:40 without knowing what had woken me. The bedroom window was closed, the alley below empty, but the streetlight at the far end had gone out. The streetlight stayed off for 40 minutes. I know because I sat there watching, sitting up in bed, back against the wall, looking down at the dark alley below. Nothing moved, no unusual sounds. Just the light out where it should have been on, and that specific quality of darkness that isn't the absence of light. It's the presence of something else. At 3:20, the light came back on. The alley was empty. I didn't sleep after that. I sat in the same position until dawn, which is the kind of thing I would have described as a stress response in any patient of mine. Hypervigilance, nervous system in threat mode after recent trauma. I knew the clinical name for what I was doing and did it anyway. The next morning, I called my mom. She lived in Weston, 40 minutes east on Route 33, a single-story house on Arbuckle Road she'd bought the year my father retired, and where he hadn't lived long enough to enjoy. She stayed after he died because she said the garden was too good to leave behind. My mother worked 30 years as a school nurse. She had the same quality I tried to have at work, the ability to look at a situation and respond to what was actually there, not to what she feared or hoped. I told her I needed to spend a few days. She said, "Come." I didn't tell her why. I got there around lunchtime. She was in the garden with her work gloves on, transplanting something into the raised beds. She saw me coming, looked at my face, and said nothing except, Come inside. I'll make food. She asked over soup. I told her part of it. Ashley, the search, the tracks. I didn't tell her about the streetlight going out. I didn't tell her about the alley. She listened without interrupting, which meant she was taking it seriously. You think she's dead? She said. It wasn't a question. The sneaker was still tied, I said. She put her spoon down, sat quietly for a moment. Then, what did you hear that night? In the brush. I hadn't mentioned any sound. She looked at me. You went back inside to get Roy, she said. You don't walk away from a scene. I looked at my soup. Breathing, at the tree line, large and heavy, nothing I recognized. Not a bear. Not a bear. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, There are things in these mountains that don't have a good name. She looked at her hands. Your grandfather used to say that, and he wasn't a superstitious man. I looked at her. He saw something once, on the ridge above Stone Coal Lake. Never said exactly what, just that it moved wrong. Too large, and the way it breathed. She ran her finger along the edge of her bowl. He never went back to that ridge, and he'd hunted it his whole life. We didn't talk about it after that. She set up the guest room, the same one where I slept during summers as a teenager, and I lay down at 7 with the curtains open because the view was fields and hills, and I could see anything that moved. I was asleep before 8. I woke up at 2:40. The house was making its usual sounds. The old boiler, the pipes, the specific creak in the hallway I'd known since I was 12. Everything normal. I got up and went to the window. The fields behind the house stretched 300 yards to a hedgerow, and beyond it the land climbed toward the hill, where the old dairy barn used to stand before it burned. At 2:40 in the morning, with no moon, it was just gradations of dark. I stood at the window for 10 minutes. Nothing moved in the fields. I went back to bed and told myself it was nothing. Disturbed sleep, stress response. I'd treated enough people to know how the nervous system misfires after trauma, hypervigilance, pattern recognition in overdrive, the body mistaking ordinary darkness for threat. I almost believed it. In the morning I called Trevor. Harmon found more tracks, he said. Along the creek, almost 2 miles from the barn, fresh. He thinks whatever it is uses the drainage as a travel corridor. Heading northeast, I said. Yeah, toward the Elk River headwaters. I knew that terrain, dense forest, old growth in some stretches. Miles of federal land with no roads, no development, no regular human presence. Something could move through there for years without being found. And Ashley, I said. Nothing. His voice went flat. Harmon didn't say it out loud, but he changed the classification. It's a recovery operation now. I stayed at my mother's house 2 more days. On the second day, I drove the roads I'd known my whole life, the county roads south of Weston, through the valleys, past old farmhouses and church graveyards with headstones from the 1800s, and thought about my grandfather saying there was something in the mountains that moved wrong. I thought about Dr. Bass describing the mapping behavior, the animal learning the territory, the rhythms, the movements of the things that lived there. I thought about Ashley pressing her phone into my hand, and I thought about something I'd been avoiding since the conversation with Burl Casto. That idea I'd left sitting quiet in the corner of my mind because looking at it closely meant accepting something that had no clinical name, that didn't fit into any response protocol I knew. That barn had been used before, regular events. People, music, movement. Nothing had happened at any of them. And then it happened with Ashley. On the 3rd day, I packed my bag and drove back to Buckhannon. Frank, my building super, a retired steel worker from Sistersville, who kept the boiler running and complained about the parking lot with admirable consistency, was at the service entrance when I got back. He saw me and called out before I could go inside. Come look at something. He took me to the side alley, pointed at the concrete at the base of the building, directly below my apartment. Marks on the concrete, wide, parallel, the kind something with wet feet leaves crossing a dry surface. And at one point, one single unmistakable point, a complete impression, 5 digits spread wide, the center one the longest. Frank stood beside me waiting for me to tell him what it was. Probably a raccoon, I said. A big one. He looked at the impression. It was larger than his size 11 boot. "Raccoon," he repeated, no inflection. "I don't know, Frank. I'll look into it." I went upstairs and sat on the couch with my hands between my knees. The mark was there. Whatever had made it had been standing directly below my bedroom window. I had gone up to the fence. I had stepped in the same mud. I had carried that smell with me on my shoes, on the hem of my jeans, on my skin. Maybe it hadn't been a coincidence. Maybe something that night had registered me too. I didn't call Harmon. I knew exactly how it was going to sound. But I sat there looking at my phone for a long time. And then I looked at the ceiling and thought about my grandfather who never went back to that ridge, and thought that maybe he knew something I was learning now. That there are things that once they find you don't forget the way back. That night I couldn't eat dinner. I heated up some soup I had in the fridge, sat down at the table, stared at the bowl for 5 minutes and poured it back in the pot. It wasn't hunger. It was the kind of absence that comes when the body decides it has more urgent priorities than eating, and redirects everything towards staying awake and alert and ready for something you can't name yet. I turned on the TV to have a voice in the room. Put on a cooking channel, no volume, just to have movement on the screen. I stayed on the couch until 10. Then I went to the bedroom, lay down with the lamp on and stared at the ceiling. I thought about calling Donna. I sat there with the phone in my hand for about 2 minutes. I didn't call. I had nothing useful to say. And Donna deserved not to get an empty comfort call from someone who was lying in her own bedroom with the lamp on because she was afraid of the dark. I fell asleep without noticing, which sometimes happens when exhaustion runs deep enough to outweigh fear. I woke up at 2:40. My body had calibrated to the time. That happens after repeated interruptions. Sleep architecture reorganizes itself around the intrusion, and you start waking before the stimulus, as if the organism decided it was more efficient to be awake than to be caught off guard. I lay there and listened. The boiler, the pipes, the specific creak in the hallway outside that I knew by heart, everything in its place. Then I heard the other thing. From the back window in the bedroom, the one facing the side alley, 3rd floor, came a sound that took me a few seconds to identify. It wasn't wind, it wasn't the heating system. It was friction, slow, intermittent, like something with a rough surface moving against the exterior wall of the building. I sat up slowly. I didn't turn on the light. I moved to the side of the window and pressed my back against the wall, then turned my head to look through the gap in the curtain. The alley was dark. The street light at the far end was out again. I waited for my eyes to adjust. 3 seconds. 5. There was a mass at the base of the building, in the corner between the dumpster and the wall directly below my window. Too dark to make out any detail. But there was something there that hadn't been there before. A volume, a presence pressed up against the wall. I watched for a full minute without moving. Then the mass moved. It wasn't fast. It was the movement of something that isn't in any hurry, that doesn't need to be. That has learned that hurrying is something animals do when they still have predators. It went up the wall in a way I couldn't process right away, because my brain rejected the information. There were no handholds, no visible support structure beyond the flat masonry, and yet the mass climbed, slow and heavy, using the wall in a way the wall was never built to allow. I stepped back from the window. My heart was beating in my throat. I breathed through my nose, slowly, the technique I use before walking into accident scenes when the body wants to panic, but the job won't let it. The friction sound continued. Rising, 2nd floor. I moved into the hallway without turning anything on. Grabbed my phone from the nightstand. Not the flashlight. Light draws attention, and I didn't want attention. I stood in the dark hallway with my phone in my hand and listened. The friction stopped. Silence for maybe 20 seconds. Then the bedroom window groaned. Not the sound of wood expanding with temperature. I know that sound. The building is old and does it constantly. This was pressure. The specific groan of a window frame being pushed from the outside in. The sound glass makes when the load applied to it is approaching the limit before it gives. I went to the front door. I undid both locks, took off the chain, opened the door. The hallway was lit, empty, completely normal. I stepped out and pulled the door shut behind me. I went down the stairs fast, all 3 flights, without looking back. The lobby was empty. Frank wasn't there, probably doing his rounds. His TV was on, showing a baseball game on mute. The clock on the wall said 2:53. I breathed, tried to think. I couldn't go back to the apartment. I couldn't stand there. I needed somewhere with people and light, and as many people as possible between me and the 3rd-floor window. The back door, the one leading to the alley, groaned. Opening. I went out the front door. The street was empty, a few parked cars. No pedestrians. I started walking fast down Kanawha Street with no specific destination. Just moving toward the lights I could see 3 blocks away on the main avenue. The diner on Nutterfort Road was open 24 hours. I went in. 3 people. The guy behind the counter, a young couple sharing fries, an older man reading a newspaper. I sat at a table in the back with my back against the wall and a clear line of sight to the door. I ordered coffee. I stayed there for 2 hours. The couple left. The older man left. Others came in. Left. The counter guy glanced at me every now and then but didn't say anything, which was all I needed from him. At 4:40 I called Trevor. He answered with a sleepy voice. "Carol, what time is it? Sorry to wake you, can you come get me?" Silence. Then, "Where are you?" I gave him the diner's address. He said he'd be there in 20 minutes. He got there in 18. He came in, saw me, walked straight to the table. He had the look of someone who'd left the house knowing it was serious and not yet knowing how serious. "What happened? I'll tell you on the way. Let's go." In the car, while he drove with no particular destination, I told him. The street light out again, the friction sound, the mass climbing the wall, the window frame groaning. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he sat quiet for a while, looking at the road. "3rd floor," he said finally. "Yeah." He didn't say I was imagining things. He didn't say it was stress, that it was the trauma from the party, that I should see a therapist. He just kept both hands on the wheel and looked at Route 20 opening up ahead. "You can stay at my place," he said. "As long as you need. I don't want to put you in..." "Carol." He glanced at me for a second. "Stay at my place." I stayed. Trevor's mom made coffee at 6 in the morning and stood in the kitchen looking at me for a moment with the expression mothers have when they know that anything they say will be the wrong thing. Then she held me by the shoulders for about 3 seconds without saying a word and turned back to the stove. I needed that very much. That night on Trevor's couch, I slept without waking up. First complete sleep in days. It was still dark when he shook me by the shoulder at 5:30. Message in the family group. He held out his phone. "Donna. Sent 10 minutes earlier, at 5:18 in the morning. They found blood in the brush near the barn. A lot of it. Police going now." I was on my feet before I finished reading. "Let's go," I said. We got to the barn at 6:20. The sun hadn't fully come up yet, but the sky was already lightening. That pale blue before dawn that makes everything look washed out and cold and colorless. There were more cruisers than any previous night. An ambulance, 2 unmarked cars, the DNR truck, and outside, in a separate group near the entrance, family members nobody had called, but who had shown up anyway because that's how it works in a small town. The news arrives before the phone call does. Donna was there. She had driven back from Elkins during the night, her sister Linda beside her. She was sitting on the tailgate of Roy's truck in a jacket too light for the morning cold, hands in her lap, looking at the tree line. She wasn't crying. She was past crying. There was something worse on the other side of it, a stillness I recognized from work, the kind that comes when a person has absorbed enough to know what's coming next and is just waiting for someone to say it out loud. Harmon came to me before I could get to her. He had started doing that, coming to me first. I think it was partly because I was a paramedic, and he knew I could receive information without falling apart, and partly because he had decided I was the person who asked the right questions. "We found her at 6:15, he said, voice low. "Creek drainage, about 2 miles from the barn." He stopped. "There isn't much intact. We're treating it as remains recovery. Family won't be able to see." I processed that. "What did you find?" "Pieces," he said. "Spread over about 100 feet and around the perimeter of the site. Tracks. Moving in a circle. Based on the variation in depth, it came back more than once. It stayed with her, I understood. After it took her, it came back. "Sergeant, I know," he said. "How long after she was taken did it come back?" He looked at me. The mud showed different layers of compression. "The medical examiner will determine more precisely, but the preliminary estimate is that there were at least 2 visits to the site after the initial event." A pause. "Over the course of several days." I stood looking at the brush beyond the fence for a moment. Then I went to Donna. She saw me coming and didn't move, just followed my approach with her eyes, with that stillness that was worse than anything I could have found on her face. I sat beside her on the tailgate. The metal was cold through my jeans. I didn't say anything. Neither did she. We sat like that for a while, looking at the same tree line that neither of us could stop looking at. "She went out the wrong door," Donna said finally. "Yeah, to get some air, or check a message, or just because a party is loud and sometimes you need a minute." She looked at her hands. "That's the kind of thing she would do." "It is. If I had come." She stopped. "If I hadn't stayed home with that migraine." I knew what she was going to say before she said it. I hear it on calls. It's the sentence family always builds afterward. The if, the variable they put back into the past to see if the outcome changes, knowing it won't, but doing it anyway because the mind has to try. "It wouldn't have changed anything," I said. She nodded slowly. Not because she believed it, because it was what there was to do with that sentence. Harmon gathered everyone at 11. He said what needed to be said in the careful language of police procedure. "Remains consistent with animal attack, DNA confirmation pending, investigation ongoing, search for the responsible animal continuing." He said the USDA Wildlife Services had been contacted, that they would come with traps and tracking equipment and sweep the federal land on the ridge. Someone asked if they were going to kill the animal. "If we identify the animal responsible, yes," he said. I could see in his face that he didn't believe they would find it. I didn't believe it either. After the meeting, in the parking lot, Roy stood beside me. We looked at the tree line together for a while without talking. Roy was like that. He processed in silence, needed space before he could organize anything into words. "My dad used to say there were things in these mountains," he said finally. "I know. My mom said the same thing." He went quiet again. He thought he saw something once, up above Stone Coal Lake. Never went back there. He looked at his hands. I always figured he was just getting old and telling stories. I didn't respond. The DNA confirmation came that afternoon. Harmon called Trevor. It was Ashley. I sat on Trevor's couch and looked at the wall and felt nothing, which I knew was temporary. I was grateful for it while it lasted. The case was classified as an animal attack. Cause of death: predation by unknown animal. Investigation open, no animal captured. The Wildlife Services team spent 4 days on the ridge and found nothing beyond tracks and opened deer carcasses, and classified everything as likely mountain lion. Possibly a juvenile developmental anomalies to explain the unusual morphology of the tracks. Mountain lion. A mountain lion weighs 60 pounds at most, leaves tracks smaller than my open hand. I looked at Grayson's photograph, still saved on my phone, and thought about mountain lion. Then I thought about the mass climbing the wall of my building to the 3rd floor, pressing the window frame until it groaned. I didn't say anything to Harmon about the classification. Let it go. But I saved every photograph I had, and I didn't delete any of them. The following week I went to my apartment to get my things. Frank had had the bedroom window repaired. There was a thin crack in the lower corner of the glass that I hadn't noticed the night I fled, starting at the frame and running 2 inches upward. The kind of crack that comes from sustained pressure. The glazier had replaced the entire pane. I packed in 20 minutes, didn't look at the bedroom much. Grabbed clothes, documents, the notepad from the kitchen table. Ashley's phone was still in the pocket of the jeans I'd worn the night of the party, washed and folded in the drawer. I stood looking at it for a moment. Then I put it in my backpack and went downstairs. Frank was in the lobby. He saw me with my bags and didn't ask anything. Just opened the door and held it while I walked through. "Take care of yourself," he said. "You too, Frank," I said. I walked out to the street. The sun was strong, the kind of October sun that warms without convincing. And Buckhannon was completely normal around me. People on the sidewalk, cars, the smell of dry leaves that September leaves behind when it turns to October. I got in the car. I sat for a minute with my hands on the wheel before starting the engine. I didn't know yet that it wasn't over. That ending wasn't something that thing did. That it came back to what it knew, to what it had mapped, to what it had learned. And that it had learned my face 6 floors below where I was sitting now. I started the engine and left Kanawha Street for the last time. In February, Pete Garland called me. He was a conservation officer with the DNR based out of Elkins, Randolph County, about 50 miles northeast of where Ashley had died. He'd found my name in the Upshur County incident file and had been trying to reach me for 3 weeks. He said he needed to talk about the Kern case. We met at a coffee shop in Elkins on a Tuesday afternoon, 48 years old, compact with the quietness of someone who spends years in isolated places. He'd served in the Army before the DNR. He had a folder, and he slid photographs across the table toward me. Tracks, clear impressions in creek mud. I felt the recognition like cold water going down. They match the photographs from Upshur County, he said. Stride length, digital spread, heel depth. It's been moving south along the Elk River headwaters for the past 4 months. Last confirmed sign was 12 days ago, here. He pointed to the topographic map, a location about 15 miles northeast of Elkins. I also found 4 deer, 2 sheep from a farm up on the ridge, and a domestic dog, all in the same condition. Opened, I said. Opened. 6 months. It had moved south, then east, then south again, following the ridge. The old-growth corridor that runs like a spine through the Appalachians, connecting everything. I want to go to the site, I said. He looked at me. I was waiting for you to say that. We went out on a Friday morning, gray sky, cold, the kind of February that sits low to the ground in West Virginia. Pete's truck Route 33 east, and then a series of county roads getting progressively narrower, and then a dirt Forest Service access road, and then we parked and walked. The site was in a hollow, third-growth oaks and rhododendron. Pete walked with the confidence of someone who'd been there 4 times. He showed me the tracks, deeper now than in the barn photographs, the heel impacts heavier, the creature carrying more weight or moving with more force. He showed me 2 deer carcasses, 2 weeks old under a light snow. He showed me a rock face near the creek where the tracks concentrated. It comes back here, he said. Multiple visits. It has a territory, I said, and it's expanding south. He opened the map again, overlaying the confirmed sites. At this rate, about 9 miles per month, it would reach the Kanawha Basin in approximately Charleston, I said. That's where I live now. He started to say something, then stopped. I smelled it first. The same smell from the field behind the barn on the night of Ashley's party. Iron and meat and turned earth and something underneath that I still couldn't name, but that I recognized now the way I recognize the smell of an accident scene before I can see anything. The body knows before the eyes do. Closer than it had been that night. Much closer. Pete smelled it too. His hand went to the rifle on his shoulder. We stood still for 3 seconds. The rhododendron on the opposite bank of the creek, 30 yards ahead, moved. It wasn't wind. I knew how wind moves through rhododendron. I grew up in these mountains. The branches bent from the bottom up, pushed by something passing through from the inside, and what I saw in the 2 seconds before the brush closed again was a portion of a shape. A shoulder or flank too large. The proportions wrong in a way that's very hard to describe except to say that the angles weren't the angles of any animal I know. A limb bent in a direction limbs don't bend. And the texture in those 2 seconds was sparse and dark and pale where the skin showed through. Not enough fur. Everything not enough. Not enough for a name. Enough for certainty. Pete raised the rifle. Don't, I said. The sound will draw it. He looked at me, face controlled. Behind the eyes, the specific adjustment of a trained person encountering something that falls outside their training. The brush was quiet. We need to get back to the truck, I said. We moved fast. Not running. Running triggers pursuit response in a predator. I had thought about that. Fast and deliberate. Pete covering behind us every few steps. Both of us watching the rhododendron along the bank. 50 yards from the truck when Pete stopped. I turned. He was staring at the brush to our right, the same dense vegetation we had walked through on the way in, which had been empty 20 minutes ago. "Pete," he said, "run." I ran. I heard the sound behind me, the breathing amplified, wet and low and very close. I heard Pete shout once, one word. I'm not going to write what it was. After that, nothing that was Pete. I got to the truck, locked. Pete had the keys. 30 seconds. I pressed my back against the fender and counted. The brush had gone completely silent. Not bird quiet silent. The kind of silence that means nothing in the forest wants to make noise right now. Pete had told me, leaving Elkins, that he kept a spare key clipped under the driver's side mirror mount. He mentioned it in passing, the way you mention something you never expect to need. I reached up, found it. I got in, started it, drove. I didn't look in the mirrors until I reached the pavement. When I looked, the service road behind me was empty. They searched for Pete Garland for 11 days. They found the rifle, the jacket, and one boot. They found the tracks around the site. They classified it as a probable wildlife incident. The Randolph County investigation is open. I gave my report. I was placed on administrative leave pending psychological evaluation, which I understand and don't contest. I know exactly how I sound. What I didn't tell the department, what I haven't told anyone except the 3 other people I've been in contact with since March, is what I've been doing in the evenings. A forest ranger in Virginia, a deputy in eastern Kentucky, paramedic in eastern Tennessee. All 3 responded to incidents in the past 2 years involving unidentified tracks, opened carcasses, and at least one human disappearance classified as an animal attack. We share photographs, compare notes. We've been mapping. There's a pattern. It follows old-growth corridors and drainage systems. It moves along a route, comes back, and moves on. The territory has been expanding consistently south and west. The route ends near Charleston. I stopped waking up at 2:40. Not because I started sleeping better. I stopped because I stopped waiting. There's a difference between the two things, and it took me a while to understand what it was. Waiting is passive. It's lying there with your ear turned toward the window and counting the minutes between one sound and the next and asking yourself whether that was it or whether it's still coming. I did that for months. In Buckhannon, at my mom's house, on Trevor's couch, in the new apartment in Charleston, months of waking up at the same time, listening, waiting. Somewhere between January and February I stopped. Not because the threat went away, because I understood that waiting doesn't change what's coming, and that what's coming comes the same way regardless of how long you lie there listening to the silence. So I stopped waiting and started getting ready. My father's rifle had been in the closet since I brought my things from my mother's house in December. She didn't ask why I wanted it. She just helped me wrap it and put it in the trunk with the same expression she'd had when she told me about my grandfather and the ridge above Stone Coal Lake. The expression of someone who knows more than they can put into words and does what they can with what they have. I sighted it in January. Spent 2 weeks researching ammunition, reading hunting forums and large animal harvest reports, looking for what works on heavy flesh, on dense bone, on something that absorbs impact differently than any hunting guide was written to consider. I don't know if it'll work. I have no way of knowing, but it's what stands between me and the window, and it's better than nothing. And nothing is what I had before. The forest ranger from Virginia's name is Deb Malone. She responded to 2 incidents in Page County over the past 18 months. Tracks, carcasses, a farm family that reported the sound of heavy breathing near their barn for 3 nights in a row, before finding the horse opened on the morning of the 4th day. Deb photographed everything, sent it to me. The marks were the same. The deputy from Kentucky's name is Roy Satterley, which made me pause for a second when I saw it because Roy is my uncle's name, and for a moment it felt like the kind of coincidence that isn't a coincidence. He works in Letcher County, eastern edge of the state, the Appalachian Slope. 3 incidents in 2 years. 1 disappearance. A 52-year-old man who went out to check the barn on a November night and didn't come back. classified as accidental death by cold exposure. Roy Satterley doesn't believe that. The paramedic from Tennessee's name is Grace Tipton. She was the first of the three to contact me, 2 weeks after I shared part of my report on a closed forum for emergency responders that discusses unusual cases. She had seen the Kern case in the news and had her own photographs, her own files, her own list of dates and locations and classifications she didn't believe either. The 4 cases together form a line. Not a straight line. Nothing in the mountains moves in a straight line, but a progression. Northeastern Tennessee to southwestern Virginia, crossing southern Kentucky, moving up through West Virginia along the Appalachian spine, following the drainage of the Elk, the Gauley, the Kanawha. Dates that fit together when you put them side by side. Intervals of presence and absence that suggest a cycle, a rhythm, an intelligence of movement that isn't simple instinct. It's memory. It's routine. The map ends in Charleston, not symbolically. Literally, the last confirmed coordinates. The tracks Pete Garland photographed 12 days before he died point south-southwest along the Elk drainage. South-southwest at that scale, at that rate of movement, reaches the Kanawha Basin in weeks. Charleston is in the Kanawha Basin. I live on the 4th floor now. New building, key fob entry, camera in the hallway. I chose the floor deliberately, high enough not to be the easiest option, low enough that I can get out fast if I need to. I learned from the 3rd floor that height isn't protection, but buying time is different from being safe, and time is what I'm negotiating now. I sent the map to Harmon last week. He didn't respond for 2 days. When he did, he said he'd forward it to the Federal Wildlife Services and that I should continue my psychological evaluation. It was a polite and thorough response, and it meant nothing. I sent the map to Deb, to Roy Satterley, and to Grace Tipton too. All 3 now have their own versions of the same file, stored in separate places. Not because I necessarily believe something is going to happen to me, because I learned that information that exists in only one place is information that can disappear. Ashley's phone is still with me. I should have turned it in the first night. I'm not turning it in now. I don't know exactly why. It's not useful evidence. The police already closed the case. There's nothing in it that changes any investigation. But it's in the nightstand drawer next to the rifle, and it stays there, and I don't touch it. Maybe because it's the last object she touched before she went out the wrong door. Maybe because letting go of it means letting go of her in a way that the rest of it, the closed case, the grave in the county cemetery, the number nobody dials anymore, hasn't fully forced me to do yet. I don't know. 3 nights ago, Deb Malone texted me at 11 at night. A photo, taken with a trail camera she set up at a creek crossing in Page County, Virginia, an entry point to a property that had reported activity last month. Night vision camera, timestamp in the lower corner, 11:04 p.m., 2 days prior. The photo showed the creek bank, brush on one side, shallow water on the other, and in the center of the frame, partially out of the angle, a shape. You can't see the whole thing. You can never see the whole thing. It's as if there's something in the way it moves, in the way it occupies space, that resists being fully captured by any angle, any lens, any human eye trying to fix it into a coherent image. What shows up in the photo is a section, a shoulder or flank, the curve of something that should be a spine but bends wrong, and below that, where the limb meets the ground, the impression forming in the creek mud, 5 points, the center one the longest, each one sinking deeper than any natural weight explains. Page County, Virginia. 2 days ago. The route wasn't straight. It moved up and down through the forest corridors, but when we plotted the points on the map, the overall advance kept pulling south and west. I looked at the photo for a long time. Then I put my phone down on the table and went to the window and looked at the building's interior courtyard 4 floors below. Empty, lit, normal. I went back to bed, lay down, stared at the ceiling. The rifle was in the drawer. Ashley's phone was on the other side. Out there, somewhere between Virginia and here, along a corridor of water and old-growth forest that has existed since before any name any person ever put on these mountains, something is moving south. Steady, patient, like something that knows the way.